Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer on mastering the secondary citation, the Harvard dilemma. If you're deep into research, you've probably been there. You're reading a really fantastic paper, and suddenly the author drops this brilliant insight or perfect data point, but it's from an entirely different earlier work. You absolutely want to use that idea to strengthen your own argument, but, well, you haven't actually read that original piece yourself. Today, we're going to decode a very specific and honestly super misunderstood academic formatting rule, the secondary citation. We'll look at exactly how to navigate this within the Harvard style, breaking it down step by step so you can tackle those references with absolute confidence.
So, what actually happens when you want to cite a work that you haven't read? It's the classic academic dilemma, right? We've all faced it. You're just reading along, and your current author perfectly summarizes this older study. And that study is exactly what you need to hammer your point home. But you don't actually have that original book or article sitting in front of you. You literally only have the summary provided by the author you're reading right now. So the big question is, how do you honestly and accurately represent this whole chain of information in your own writing without straight up claiming you read something you didn't?
Well, to solve this, we rely on a secondary citation. By definition, a secondary citation is used exactly when a source you're reading discusses an earlier work that you have not read. It's an absolutely crucial tool for academic transparency. By using it, you're essentially waving a little flag to your reader saying, hey, I found this amazing information from the original author. But full disclosure, I only know about it because this second author told me. It gives credit to the genius who came up with the idea, while simultaneously being 100% honest about where you physically found the text. Honestly, this is a vital, non-negotiable distinction you have to make in your research process.
And this brilliantly illustrates how actually using a secondary citation requires a bit of a delicate balancing act. Think of it like a bridge. On one side, you have the original author, the person who actually came up with the idea or did the primary research. And on the other side, you have the consulted source, the physical book or PDF you are currently holding in your hands or reading on your screen. When you're putting together this in-text citation, you have to identify that original author right there in your sentence or bracket, but you absolutely must acknowledge the source you actually consulted to find it. You're marrying these two distinct elements together to tell the true, honest story of your research trail.
So how do we mechanically link these two together when we're using the Harvard style? Well, you use very specific bridging language. Harvard guides commonly require you to add the exact phrasing cited in or quoted in right before the source you actually consulted. These are tiny, simple phrases, I know, but they are doing a massive amount of heavy lifting in your sentence. They're basically the academic equivalent of drawing a big neon arrow to show exactly how the information traveled from the original creator, through the source you actually read, and finally landing right into your own work.
So the crucial point is this next golden rule, and I can't stress this enough because it's where so many people make a critical formatting error. Your reference list normally includes only the work you read. I really want to emphasize this because it is such an easy trap to fall into. Even though you shouted out the original author up in the main body of your text using that cited in phrase we just talked about, your final bibliography at the very end of your paper, that should only contain the source you physically accessed. Why? Because your reference list is essentially an inventory of the items you actually laid your eyes on. If you didn't read the original piece, it literally has no business being listed in your final references.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that it's not just about formatting anymore. It lays down the law on academic integrity. The guidelines are crystal clear here. First, use secondary citations sparingly. Why? Well, checking the original source is always preferable. Think about it. The author you're currently reading might have misinterpreted the original data, or maybe they just took a quote totally out of context. And that brings us to a hard, unbreakable rule. Do not copy the original reference from another author's bibliography and paste it as though you consulted it yourself. Let's be real. Pretending you tracked down some obscure 19th century manuscript when you just read a modern summary of it on a Tuesday afternoon, yeah, that's a major violation of academic trust. It is always better to be honest about your limitations using the cited-in format than to fake your bibliography.
Let's move on and see how this builds into your actual day-to-day workflow. Step 1. You can absolutely format the source you actually read using automated tools. Things like the Harvard Reference Generator. You can find it at harvardreferencegenerator.co.uk. A tool like that can be incredibly helpful for getting the baseline structure of your consulted source totally correct for your final reference list. But you cannot stop there. Step 2 is entirely mandatory. You must verify the exact secondary citation wording with your specific institutional guide.
See, the Harvard style actually has variations depending on where you're submitting your work, so your specific university or your publisher will have the absolute final say on exactly how they want that cited in phrasing formatted in the text. Online tools are great helpers, for sure, but your specific institutional guide is always the ultimate authority.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really crucial decision to think about for your next project. When you stumble upon that absolute perfect piece of evidence nested inside another author's work, what is your next move going to be? Will you rely on a secondary citation, utilizing that honest, cited-in format we just covered? Or, knowing that the rules explicitly remind us that checking the original text is always preferable, will you take the extra time and effort to hunt down that original work yourself? The secondary citation is a fantastic, totally necessary tool for transparency when you're in a pinch, but true research rigor often demands going straight to the source. The choice of how deep you dig is completely in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.